Hello, everyone. You're all very welcome to this, as Rupert said, interactive session on operations management. Let's begin by just making sure that you're all alive. Rupert has already determined where you're calling in from, but use that chat function and tell me where you are. Are you at home now? Are you in the office? Are you on a train? Are you in a coffee shop? Are you in bed? Are you in the bath? Are you out walking on the street? Are you in a park? And so on. We want to find out now if this chat box actually works. And I want to get so much activity in it that I want Zoom to be complaining to us that it went on fire in their head office. So who's going to start in the chat box? Anyone? I see stuff in the Q&A.
Looks like we are getting something through the chat box now.
Yes, a bit of a delay there. So yeah, we have it all done here. Some people are saying, many of them are saying the chat box was disabled, but Rupert has just enabled it there. So thanks to that, Rupert. So that's grand, but at least we have life here. So we have some stuff coming in. Well, okay. There'll be a couple more questions where we can test that chat box in a few moments, but let's get straight into what we're talking about today, operations management. And let me begin by asking you, how many of you again would regard yourselves as operations managers? And again, use the chat function, say yes or no, if possible. I can't see anything in the chat box. So we don't have operations managers here. But this leads us then into our next slide, which, sets out the objectives about what we're going to do today. What I want to do is to show you the role that, operations can play in achieving strategic success. And we will primarily be talking about operations management at the strategic level. I think I'll need to convince some of you that all organizations have an operations function, because some of you may have the perception of operations management as being something that happens in a factory. And although it does have its roots in production and manufacturing, operations management has moved on an awful lot since the Industrial Revolution, and now includes all types of products and services that are produced in a range of organizations. I did ask you the question a few moments ago about how many of you are operations managers, or how many of you would consider yourselves to be operations managers. And one of the tasks that I have today is to convince you that all managers are operations managers, because all managers manage process and produce output. And we'll be talking about more about that in a while. And then I want to be able to give you an insight into just how exciting operations management can be. And those of you who enroll in the MBA will certainly experience this excitement about operations management. So if we are talking in academic terms, well, I suppose what we have to be able to do is to define most of the topics that we actually talk about. So how do we define operations management? What is operations management? Well, I suppose simply put, operations management is about the design and the direction of the processes that take input, carry out a transformation, and produce output. And diagrammatically, we can show that here on this slide here. So to understand everything about operations management, well, I shouldn't say everything, I'd say most things about operations management, we could take a deep dive into this particular slide that you can see in front of you here. And basically looking at it on the left-hand side, we can see, that we have transformed and transforming resources. And what is transformed as material, information, and our customers. And then we have the transformation process itself that you can see in the center of the screen. And what the operations managers are concerned about here are what we call the 4Ds. And most or many courses in operations management are built around a number of pillars. And those pillars in this instance are the 4Ds. They are the design, deliver, develop, and direct. So that's what we would be looking at about what operations managers are actually involved in. Now, no operation exists in isolation. Operations is primarily a part of an organization, and organizations are part of a wider system and a wider environment. So they're greatly influenced by what's happening out there. And again, what operations do is produce output, and the output that's produced is in the form of products and services. And hopefully they are the products and services that are required by customers. So at the bottom of the screen here, we can see a formal definition that operations management is the activity for managing the resources that create and deliver products and services. So if you want to really understand in simple terms what operations management is, I would suggest simply take a look around you, because wherever you are in the world today, and I asked you this earlier, you know, or Rupert asked you, where were you? And I asked you, what were you doing? Well, you know, if you're sitting on a chair, that chair, the desk you're sitting at, maybe the computer screen you're looking at, the room that you're in, the clothes that you're wearing, have all been produced by an operation. And every service that you consume on a daily basis, whether it is the alarm clock that wakes you up in the morning, whether it's a radio station, a television program, buying insurance, staying in a hotel, buying an airline ticket, consuming a coffee, or even listening to me today, these are all services produced by operations. So operations management is all around us every day. And I suggest to you that just as fish, you know, are said to be totally unaware of the water that surrounds them, well, most of us pass our daily lives with, you know, being totally oblivious to the processes that create all of the products and services that we all consume on a daily basis. So basically, that's what operations management is. Now, at the MBA level, I suggested to you when I read out the objectives earlier, there are a number of objectives, and operations management is strategically important. And this is where we will place emphasis when we're studying operations management, because you could say it exists at two levels: the strategic level and the operational level. Now, at the operational level, the operations managers and the teams are concerned with such things as managing the day-to-day activities, the operations, scheduling activities, dealing with customers, dealing with suppliers, trying to manage inventory and deal with maybe problems and issues that are occurring. But there is also the strategic level. And to introduce the strategic level, Skinner, a famous author on the subject of operations management, says that the company operations function can either be a formidable competitive weapon or a corporate millstone. It's seldom neutral. It needs to be managed strategically, and it needs to play a full strategic role. So my question to you today would be, are you capable of producing that formidable competitive weapon when you formulate an operation strategy? Or when you formulate the strategy, is it done in a piecemeal fashion where it is better, faster, cheaper all the time? And that's what you're trying to do. So in other words, you're running fast in order to stand still. Let me suggest. Now, to reinforce what Skinner is saying, I'll introduce you to another Hayes and Wheelwright four-stage model of operations contribution. And again, this looks at the strategic contribution of the operations function. Now, there are a number of stages here that we can see, four in fact. And what I'm asking you to do now is to place your mindset at one of these stages. Stage one, for example, the operations function will not be considered from a strategic perspective. So the strategy that's imposed by the business, that's formulated by the business, will be imposed on the operations function. This type of function will probably be inwardly focused. In other words, it's not very well focused on serving its customers. People working there may well be more concerned about their own terms and conditions and their own career prospects. They might be disappointing and letting down customers, making mistakes, producing errors. So it follows they will be spending some time fixing the mistakes and the errors that they actually make themselves. Now, can any of you in the Q&A or in the chat function, hopefully, give me an example of an organization that exists at stage 1 of this Hayes and Wheelwright model? And while you're thinking about it, I'll be moving on and answering the question myself, and saying to you that at stage 1, the operation will probably not be in a competitive environment. It might more well be in a monopoly position, or it might be something like, for example, a government department, a public service. And I'm sure whereas some public services are excellently delivered, there are more of them that very disappoint their customers. They leave their customers hanging on. It is very difficult to get stuff from them and so on. And I know that in my own background, which Rupert introduced to you as being in telecoms, we used to leave our customers waiting for months sometimes for telephone service. Now, this was back before mobile telephony came along and markets were liberated and deregulated and so on. But our customers had no choice but to come to us because we were the only telecommunications company, and they didn't have any choice. And telecommunications is essential for every business. So that was a position that, you know, you wouldn't survive in today in the competitive environment. Stage 2 then is you're as good as your competitors, and being as good as your competitors is excellent. However, it is probably at this stage where you start thinking strategically and you start introducing what you might call best practice. In other words, new philosophies maybe on operations improvement, like Six Sigma, lean philosophy, just in time, all of these good words. But again, you're doing things better, faster, cheaper. Now, being clearly the best in the industry is at stage 3. This is where the operations function is driving the business level strategy. It is not marketing. It is not finance. It is the operations function. So if you like, it is the, dare I say, the Twitters of this world, the Microsofts of this world, the Samsungs, the Apples, are all the operations functions that drive the business level. And this is a great place to be. You might believe, or you might think it is, to be there, but there is a stage 4, and stage 4 is about redefining the industry's expectations. So if we were having a live session now, I'd be asking you such questions as, so to give me the name of the biggest hotel chain in the world. And you might say to me, oh, it's the Hilton, it's the Mandarin Oriental, it's one of the others. But then I'd say to you, have you heard of Airbnb? And this is where redefining the industry's expectations comes about. This is stage 4. So although organizations might be at stage 3 and they may have global dominance, they may be respected as being the very best in the world, what you have to remember is that somebody somewhere in the world is going to come up with a good idea and pull the rug from under you, and then there is a new game on. And this brings us back to our previous slide where we spoke to, I'm just trying to get it up there, where we spoke about Skinner and this formidable competitive weapon. If you want to create this formidable competitive weapon, you have to start thinking differently. You cannot be thinking about incremental changes in which to formulate your strategy and do things a little bit better. You have to be doing them differently. You have to be regarded as a disruptor, someone who is a game changer. And this is the mindset that we seek to develop on the MBA program. And it's happening all the time. Some of you, 5, 6, 7 years ago will remember Nokia and global dominance. Everyone had a Nokia product in their pocket, a mobile phone, and then more or less suddenly they went off that cliff and disaster when Apple and Samsung introduced glass screens and people could type on them. RIM, Research in Motion, was also a fabulous BlackBerry phone. They're gone. Kodak, the camera people, again, global dominance, the mobile phone saw the demise of those. Great organizations like Borders, the bookshops, all gone, you know, and history is full of examples of this. If we, you know, think back to the early days, most of you will at least have heard of Encyclopedia Britannica, who were the global leaders in encyclopedias, biggest sales force in the world, until somebody came along and created a CD, and then suddenly there's a new game on in town. Now, I'm not asking you to come up with these wild ideas, but just small ideas in terms of doing things differently. And on the MBA program, you will see it everywhere. You will see original thinking applied. Think differently, think hard, think global, you know, because at the bottom of the screen, you can see where I've written that if you want something you never had, then you've got to do something you've never done. Because in other words, if you don't start creating this strategic mindset, well then, the other saying comes to my mind that, you know, if you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got. So that's not what we want in our MBA program. And we don't want people thinking about at the operational level. That's for the operations manager and team dealing day-to-day basis. Thinking strategically is important. And again, we would go a lot deeper in this in terms of studying the subject. In front of you here, what do you see? And again, right on the screen in the Q&A or in the chat, and quickly just write it in there. You know, some of you will be saying that, you know, that's simple. That's an A, B, C. And yes, I would agree with you. But then if you block out the A and the C, you might start to say, oh, well, that's not really a B. That's a 13. Yes. Now, it was always there. And the point about this particular slide that I want to make to you is that these ideas that we're looking for in terms of formulating operations strategy, coming up with ideas for the operations function, are simple ideas that are right in front of us. I mean, the biggest transport organization in the world is now Uber. And look at what they have done to the taxi industry. Look what Airbnb, as I said, has done to the hotel industry. Simple ideas that came about. And even we could look at other ideas. Michael Dell did the same to the computer industry in terms of laptops and computers and so on. And all he did was come up with a simple idea to change around the supply chain, you know, streamline that supply chain, and then suddenly everything is different. New game on in town. So let's get back and talk about the operations management. Now, again, I've said to you that every manager is an operations manager because every manager manages process. And this is something that I'm here to sell to you today. So every organization will take material information and our customers and carry out a value-added transformation. So in one end, we take raw material component parts, we carry out value-added transformation, and we produce output. That's simply what operations management is. What we actually take in is material information and customers, and we transform them. So in terms of the transformation process, you know, think about this for a moment. Who physically transforms material? You know, and you would say to me, well, all manufacturers, and that's straightforward enough, that's there. Who transforms material? Well, a finance manager might do that because he or she might take input in terms of raw financial data, manipulate that and produce financial reports. And they will be concerned about things like the error rate, the efficiency of the process, how well they do it, about improvement, managing the team and so on. So the concepts and methods, the tools and techniques of operations management will be of use to them. And then we have physically, who physically transforms the customer? Well, some of you might say something like the airlines, but the airlines don't physically transform them. You know, people like hairdressers, beauticians, cosmetic surgeons will take a customer and transform them. You know, if I had more hair, I might go to a barber and the barber might transform me in terms of a new hairdo. And that's an operation in itself. Now, the location of material, you know, we have postal services and courier companies do that. Location of information, telecoms, the location of customer. Well, here we have, you know, trains, buses, airlines, and so on. The possession of material, by that we mean ownership, and a high street shop might do that, a high street retailer, Zara, H&M, Marks and Spencer, so on, all of those guys. The possession of information, we might have news services, or maybe even consultants might do that as well. And then the possession of the customer. Here we're talking about the emotional or the psychological state of the customer. So when the customer is taken in and transformed, they come out in a different psychological or emotional state. And that might be something as simple as a fun park or a cinema, or maybe a concert. When you go to these places, like if you travel to Disney and you're there with all the characters, you will have great fun and you'll be buzzing when you come out of it. So you'll be actually transformed as well by that. In terms of material, who stores material? Well, warehouses might do that. And corporate data warehouses or archives might store information. And then who stores the customer? Think about this one. Who stores the customer? Well, you might say something like a jail or a prison. They store customers, and hotels, they would do it. And this little exercise and discussion that we're having on this particular slide is to reinforce to you the fact that operations management is not just about making stuff. It's not, as I said earlier, about what's produced in the factory or manufactured. It now involves every industry and organization, whether that's healthcare, banking or finance or services, or some of the examples that you see here or on the next screen. So what you learn in operations management will be of use to you no matter what industry or organization you work in, and no matter what level you work at in those organizations. And it is a transferable skill. So what you learn in manufacturing could simply be transferred and used in healthcare or banking or any of the other examples that you can see on the screen here. Now, although I've said to you, and you can see on these screens, that what is predominantly transformed is material, information, or customers, very few, if any, organizations transform just information, just material, or just customers. Many of them transform a mix of these. So, for example, a restaurant will transform customers through the dining experience. They will go and they will have a nice night out, eating and drinking and conversation and so on, and the ambience of the restaurant will facilitate that. Information will be transformed by the customer making a booking for a table, by placing an order from the menu, by processing that order into the kitchen for the ingredients to be prepared and transformed into meals. Information will also be transformed by way of paying the bill and so on. And then material is transformed, obviously, from the food, from being in a raw state into a final cooked state or being prepared for consumption. So we can see there where there is a mix of material, information, and customers. But what we have to understand and what we have to be able to differentiate between is what is the predominant transformed resource? Is it material? Is it information? Or is it the customer themselves? And then how they are transformed, you know, what is the mix? It was said that there is no pure service provider, that there will always be a facilitating product to go with that. The only example that I can come up with would be a journey in a taxi where you got in the taxi and you got out, but there was, you know, a material transformed as well by way of the receipt that taxi drivers in most parts of the world now are obliged to provide their customer with. So we can see a mix here, but again, ensure that we can identify the predominant transformed resource. So I hope this is making sense to you. And although I can't see any of you, I know that you're out there. And again, if you have any questions, I will take questions as well at the end. So if you store them up, or if you want to jump into any of the Q&As or chat or whatever, that's perfectly welcome as well. But again, we're jumping back into our general model of operations management. And what we're looking at now is the output. So we can see the output here on the screen, and what we produce are products and our services. Now, in terms of producing stuff, it is generally either a product or a service. Now, this can be a bit cloudy, this area, but again, we can define the difference between them. Products are generally tangible. They can be produced without the customer being present. So sometimes there is no customer at all for the product when they are being manufactured or produced. And you could say that about things like mobile phones and stuff like that. Sometimes they can be, they can appreciate in value, or they can depreciate in value. They can be sold, and they can be sold several times. They can be transported and moved. Some products will deteriorate, like food and drinks and stuff. And the quality is generally evident and can be easily interpreted. For example, if we had a product and we purchased an electronic product and it didn't work, well, then there's a quality defect, and that's easy enough to identify. Whereas services are a bit trickier. Well, they're a lot trickier because they're intangible. So when something is intangible, you can't feel it or touch it. And the key differences here would include that production and consumption happen simultaneously. So the customer generally has to be present for the transformation to actually take place. So again, that example of a hairdresser, that if I go in, or if you go into a hairdresser, or you want your hair done, well, you must be actually physically present for the transformation to take place. So nothing can be stored either. You cannot store it. Generally, you cannot store a service and sell it again tomorrow. For example, if an airline takes off today and there are empty seats in it, or if a hotel room has rooms that it doesn't sell tonight, well, it cannot sell those again tomorrow. And quality is very difficult, or it's very subjective in a lot of instances. And take, for example, two people checking into a hotel. They're dealt with in the same way by the reception staff. They have, if I can call them, identical rooms. And then the next day they leave and they go on TripAdvisor, and one gives a 1-star review and the other a 5-star review. Now, there's a couple of things that we can learn from this. The first one is that customers respond emotionally to service. There will nearly always be an emotional response. Now, it may not be extreme, but it will be an emotional response. And customers, when they avail the services, really what they're buying is an experience. And because of these things and others, it is difficult for an organization then to design the processes to deliver these services when customers respond emotionally to them. But that's one of the challenges that we talk about in the operations environment, and we try to take it a bit deeper in there. So now, jumping into the heart of really what operations management is, we can see here in the middle the transformation process itself. Now, process is the lifeblood of the organization, and in particular, the lifeblood of the operations function. It is the movement of the flow units through the network of activities that we can see here, where again, the inputs are transformed into outputs. basically it could be raw material transformed into finished goods or maybe component parts. And this is where most of the value is added in all functions. And again, I'm not restricting this just to the operations function or what might be deemed to be the operations function within the business, because a lot of organizations don't have something called an operations function. It may be under a different name. But as I said to you earlier, that all managers are operations managers because all managers manage process. So sometimes I can argue that every function within the business could be deemed to be an operations function because they all manage process. So in terms of this, what we're looking at here is an insight into it. Now, why is process important? Well, I think this slide sums it all up, and particularly what Louis Vuitton here has said about his key competitor, which is Zara. You know, he said they are possibly the most innovative and devastating retailer in the world. Now, you would expect somebody to insult their competitor, but he gives them the ultimate compliment. And what has differentiated Zara from other competitors in their field or in their industry? Well, I would suggest to you that it is their process, and it is how they manage their processes from end to end. Now, with Zara in particular, it includes the entire supply chain, and this has been written about ad nauseum. And you can see on the slide here just some examples of how a streamlined, efficient process has set them aside from their competitors. And you can see that none of their competitors can come anywhere near them, although the concepts that they use to achieve this success are pretty easy to understand. It's very difficult for their competitors to actually mimic them and come anywhere near them in terms of that. Okay. I just checked now. And again, a lot of the good authors on the subject will talk about process and why it's important. And this guy, Nigel Slack, a great author on the subject of operations management, says a process which has been located in the wrong place, which has insufficient capacity, which is arranged in a jumble or confused layout, which is given inappropriate technology, or which is staffed with unskilled people, cannot satisfy customers because it cannot perform efficiently and effectively. And Michael Hammer, who would have been one of the seminal authors on this subject, you know, says no matter how individuals work, they cannot overcome a flawed process, much less the burden of no design at all. So the design of the operations function is concerned with designing a production or service delivery system that is optimized, effective, and meets the customer needs and performance objectives of the business. Now, it's around these types of statements that we design and we understand exactly what process is, and we take a much deeper dive into these things. Now, how do we go about process and what's involved in it? How do we examine them? How do we analyze them? How do we improve them? Well, I think in the first instance, what we have to do is to differentiate between manufacturing and service type process. So in manufacturing, what we do is we differentiate between the process type in terms of their volume and variety. Now, variety could mean standardization. So let me give you an example. I'd be asking you for the examples if we were face to face, but where we have a process that is extremely high volume and very low variety, in other words, very high standardization. Give me an example of that. Well, what I would say to you as examples might be any of the utilities, the water, electricity, any of the telecoms, Wi-Fi, broadband, voice telephony, so on. Very, very high degree of standardization and very high volume. So low variety, it's nearly all the same, you know, water, electricity, now some variety in there, but very little relative to the other process types. And then the other process types are mass, batch, jobbing, and project. Project on the other end, we have very low volume and very high variety, because every project is different. By definition, every project is different, because a project is a unique endeavor, to provide some kind of a product, service, or result for a customer. So every project will differ in some respects. And then we have a jobbing process, a batch and a mass. And the important thing here is more so than just identifying it by name, is to understand that sometimes, number one, it's difficult sometimes to determine if it is a batch process or a mass process, and so on. But looking at this black line, what we call the natural diagonal or the line of fit, that's the critical thing here. Because when we have our process designed, it must actually sit on that line. Otherwise, it will be incurring, for example, higher than normal unit costs. And this might be where we have too much flexibility or too little flexibility in our process itself. So we need that amount of flexibility, but not too much and not too little. Let me give you an example on that. And again, my background was in telecoms. My latter years in there were spent on transformation programs and again, writing up things like the process standards for the organization and so on. So initially, we were a very functional organization where, for example, our technicians in the morning would arrive in the headquarters. They would get their work for the day, and then they would drive out in their vans, and some would go to the customer premises, some would go to the telephone exchange, some would go to the infrastructure itself, so the cabinets or the poles that were feeding the services to the customers. So all of them working very hard and very good and doing their best, but all doing it differently. So we had too much flexibility in there, and it was very costly. So the workflow wasn't being optimized. And again, when we were transforming all that, it was the guys themselves, the technicians themselves, who came up with the good ideas about how we could do it better. And then another example of where you might have too little flexibility might be in a call center. And I'm sure all of you today have rang a call center at one stage in your lives. And if your problem or the reason for your ringing them is not scripted, well, then you're in trouble. And you're going round and round and round. And I have one such problem ongoing personally at the moment with bookings.com that go back to a holiday we took last July and a cancellation, and they actually canceled. Long story, they owe me money. And it's an absolute nightmare trying to get the money from them. And I ring them and they promise me everything, it'll be done in 5 days. And this has gone on and on and on, and it's still not solved. And I don't know how to get it solved. But look, I'm not going off on a tangent now talking about my personal problems here today. So that's the manufacturing process types. So then we look at service process types, and this is very interesting. It's probably from an operations perspective, it's the most interesting area here. Now, with service process types, we differentiate between the different service types by the degree of customization and customer interaction we see, and then the degree of labor intensity. And for example, take the professional services here, where we have a very high degree of customization and customer interaction and a very high degree of labor intensity. So an example of that might be an architect designing a house for a client. Now, the client can customize and interact with the architect all the time, saying, no, I changed my mind. I want 4 bedrooms instead of 5, or I want the bathroom to be this size and not that size, and could you move it here and there and so on. And then there's a much higher degree of labor intensity in here relative to the other sections of this matrix itself. So professional services, from an operations point of view, are very expensive. They are probably the most highest paid of any of the sections here. They are difficult to control, more difficult to control in terms of productivity, and they require much higher degrees of education and training and so on. Now, at the other end of that spectrum, we have the service factory, and this to me is the most exciting area. This is where all of the action is happening. This is where there's a much lower degree of customization, customer interaction, and a much lower degree of labor intensity. So, for example, take the airline business, where traditionally, so you went to a travel agent, and the travel agent did all the work for you. Now, who does all the work? You do all the work, or I do all the work. If I want to go on a holiday, go away for a weekend, fly from A to B, and so on. So what the airlines are doing here now, and I'm talking particularly about the low-cost airlines, the Ryanair, EasyJet, and so on of this world, there is a very low degree of customization and customer interaction, and that's getting lower and lower. And the degree of labor intensity is getting lower and lower because of the emergence of new technologies all the time. So by way of example, again, you want to go away on a holiday, or you want to go away, fly to a new city for the weekend, whatever. You do all the work online. You make the reservation, pay, so on. You check in, you download your boarding pass, you go to the airport, you go through your security and so on. You go to the gate, and then you're loaded on. You sit in the same seat as everybody else. You get very little customization or anything special. Everyone on the plane gets the same. You arrive at your destination, you get off the plane, and you go about your business. And this is where there is so much excitement and so much movement at the moment, because you can actually see on this slide here, on this slide. So again, in this environment, traditionally, what organizations thought was the most important thing was control over the staff, but it's not. And there's a recent focus now. It's not on control at all. It's on productivity. And it's about getting as much productivity as possible. Now, you can see it's called a service factory. And one of the reasons it's called that is because it seeks to get the same economies of scale that were once only available in the factory environment. So in the factory environment, we heard that going right back to the Industrial Revolutions, economies of scale, create lots of products and push them through the supply lines, and customers will buy them. But what we have here is where the customer, in a lot of cases, is becoming like the unpaid employee. You know, many of you, and I know myself from the early days when children were quite small, that we might go for a treat to McDonald's, and you know, you'd have to start cleaning up after yourselves, and you go to the counter and you order yourself and so on. So you're doing as much of the work as possible. And Nando's, if you're in the UK now, if you're calling in today from the UAE, it's a different model in there, but in the UK, again, in Nando's, you will do a lot of the work, go and order and get your utensils and your drinks and so on, rather than them doing it. And we can see why here. And, you know, by way of another example, suppose you take a law firm, and a law firm traditionally would have provided a range of professional services to you. So if you had any legal problem at all, you would go to the law firm, make an appointment, and discuss your problem. But now we have law firms moving into the service factory, where the individuals here are setting up to specialize in just one or two areas. For example, uncontested divorce cases, personal injury, employment law, and so on. So they will only specialize there. We could see, for example, the car manufacturers used to provide a range of services as well, but we now have actors or players setting up and providing just specialized services, replacing your brakes, maybe fixing your exhaust pipe, or just servicing the car. They will only carry out a very limited range of services, and they will exploit that in terms of trying to achieve greater economies of scale. And we can see that. So in terms of our environment that we operate in, we can see a lot of movement in this area. And again, think back to what we spoke about earlier in terms of designing these services for the customers, that and trying to achieve that efficient the streamline, the efficient flow through the process itself is very difficult when the output is subjective. In other words, customers responding emotionally to the process itself. But moving on from that, differentiating again the challenges within process management. In the manufacturing environment, it can be managing inventory. Inventory is just so difficult to manage, and it ties up so much of the working capital, and especially in fast-moving technology areas where customers are looking for new innovative products all the time, inventory can go obsolete very, very quickly. In the service environment, it's a lot more tricky because we have two variables here. We have demand variability, if you can see my hand, and we have processing variability. And where you have demand and processing variability, you have a key challenge. So, for example, the weekend you're going to go to a restaurant with your family or your friends. My question to you is, how long will it take you to order from the menu? And you will answer me and you will say, oh, that depends. You know, it depends if you're in a hurry. It depends if you're talking to your friends. It depends what's on the menu, how extensive it is, or how much of a hurry you're in, and so on, all those things. So then I'll say to you, how many courses are you going to order? And then you will say, oh, well, that also depends. And then how long will it take you to eat your food? And you'll say it also depends. And all of those, it depends, brings in variability. In the restaurant environment, the restaurant is only making money while people are sitting at the table. So when people are sitting at the table and holding that table all night, they don't have the opportunity to get more people in. So in terms of that, we have a lot of variability in terms of demand and processing variability. I mean, in terms of demand variability, you can see some examples here as well. You know, customers arriving at unscheduled time. You have a table for 4 people, only 2 people come and they take up the table and so on. So what we talk about in operations is about smoothing out that variability. How do we smooth out demand variability and also processing variability? And again, because it can be very, very difficult and very costly in the operations environment. And okay, I would love to carry on talking to you here, guys, but I see that I've gone to 50 minutes.